For 2025, I'm going to stick to the same resolution I had last year. At least 12 books, one per month. I fully expect to do more than that. As of this writing, I have 3 out from the library, but by keeping it low and reasonable, I'm more likely to actually reach my goal. Okay, so I might have underestimated a little bit. Hello and welcome back. It's been a year, huh? What a fucking year 2025 was. I don't know about you guys, but I had some capital S stuff happen to me last year, and no, I won't be going into it. We're here to talk about books and shit. So this was the year I really got into reading for fun again. 2024 was a big start for me, reading over 15 books. As you just heard at the start of the video here, my resolution for 2025 was to read at least 12, one book a month. I read more than that. Now, in the interest of fairness, I did DNF a couple of the books that I'm going to talk about today, so I don't know if you can say that I read them. And this was also the year that I started trying out audiobooks again. There's a whole discourse online about whether listening to audiobooks really counts as reading, which quite frankly I don't care about. If someone asks me, did you read this book, and I listened to the audiobook, I'd say yes for the purposes of participating in a conversation about the book itself. Unfortunately, I was trying to listen to my audiobooks on my commute, which for about the first half of the year was minimum 45 minutes one way. I figured that was ample time to catch up on my TBR and started getting audiobooks from Libby and Hoopla through my local public library. However, trying to listen to an audiobook while driving is something I've discovered doesn't really work for me. Driving is too demanding of my attention, and I can't focus on both effectively. I'm still going to try and find another activity to do while listening to audiobooks. I'm trying to learn crochet, for example, but you'll notice that my audiobooks taper off pretty quickly and I go back to physical books. So, I read 43 books this year. God, that's so many. In the interest of not making this video take 1.5 million years to make, while I will be discussing all of them, I won't be writing thousands of words about each book. Most of the reviews are going to be fairly short overviews of the book and my opinions about it. Some of the books I'll be talking about in this video are ones I've discussed on the channel before. If you're interested in longer reviews with more information, those are the places to look. I'll make sure to link them below. I'll still talk about those books, of course, but not nearly to the same level of detail. A couple disclaimers before we get started, which are always more or less the same. This video will contain spoilers, personal opinions, and general criticism of the books I'm discussing. If you haven't read a book and want to go in unspoiled, feel free to skip that section of the video. If you aren't interested in hearing opinions different from yours on a book, maybe skip those sections too. It's okay for us to have different opinions. If I hated something you liked or liked something you hated, I'm not making a value judgment against you personally. It is not that serious. The other thing is content warnings. I'll be doing them for each individual book again, putting them at the start of each section. These content warnings are for the books themselves, not necessarily the reviews, especially if the content warning is for something like explicit sexual content. However, if a topic is brought up in the content warnings, it's fair to assume I'll be discussing it at least a little in the review itself. Please use your discretion to decide whether a particular review will be safe for you to watch. With all of that out of the way, here we go. Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Content warnings for major character death, necromancy, undead, body horror, gore, child death, and violence. The second book in the Locked Tomb series, Harrow the Ninth follows Harrow Harknonagesimus, now Harrow the First, newly ascended lictor of the First House, as she tries to access her new lictor abilities, understand the ongoing threat and the reasons that God, John, needs lictors in the first place, and unravel the mysteries of First House. She is also, although she doesn't know this at first, grieving the loss of Gideon in the first book and has constructed a set of alternate memories of the events of the previous book. This book was just as good as the first. I'd been worried that the second-person POV would throw me off, but it worked amazingly. Harrow was so interesting and twisty. I'd managed to remain unspoiled for most of it, but even the few things I already knew about, like the fact that Gideon was still in Harrow's head, were fascinating to see actually play out. I loved being able to see more of characters we'd barely seen in Gideon the Ninth. It felt like a lot of them, especially Abigail and Magnus as the first to die in Gideon, didn't get much time to shine. Having them play more major roles in Harrow helped make up for that a lot. Like the first book, Harrow was an absolutely insane and compelling read. It answered a lot of lingering questions from book one while raising more of its own. Sequels, especially middle books in trilogies like The Locked Tomb was originally going to be, have a reputation of just kind of plodding grimly along towards the series' inevitable demise and or retreading the same grounds as the first book. Harrow did neither. It builds on the foundation of Gideon while building up to something totally different. I'm both psyched to read Nona the Ninth and kind of dreading it, because once that's done, I'll be stuck waiting for Alecto like everybody else. As of this writing, I just received Nona for Christmas, so it'll once again be my first book of the year.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
I gave Harrow the Ninth 5 stars because, come on, this book fucks severely. On Writing by Stephen King. Content warnings for discussion of alcoholism and a major injury, in this case a car accident. I've never actually read any Stephen King books before this. I'm honestly not sure what compelled me to pick this one up. I think it was for an online class I was taking through Gale courses at my local public library. I vaguely remember something about an assignment to read a book about writer's craft, and I think someone in my writing group's Discord server recommended this one. I'd also been kind of interested in reading some Stephen King in general, and figured, why the hell not start with his memoir? What else was I doing? It's fine. For the most part, I did enjoy it. Say what you will, the man can turn a phrase. If I was still trying to write down quotes from all the books I read, I probably would have had several from this one. He's easy and interesting to read. Learning about Stephen King and his life in his own words was kinda cool. But also there were a lot of points he had, especially in regards to writing, that just made me roll my eyes. He'd say stuff along the lines of, you don't have to do it this way, but if you don't, then you're doing it wrong. Obviously, I'm a contrarian little shit, so I hated that garbage. And to be honest, I've completely forgotten basically everything he said at this point, so take that as you will. I've come to the conclusion that Stephen King, as much as I can know him from a memoir that was written 25 years ago, is kind of an asshole, but one that I wouldn't be that upset at sharing a shift with, you know? 3.5 stars. A good read that I probably won't be returning to, and honestly don't have all that much to say about. The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer. Content warnings for child abuse and homophobia. I've already talked at length about this one in my adult activity kit video from earlier this year, so I won't go into too much detail about it. The Lost Story is about a couple boys who went through a Narnia-esque experience as kids, dealing with the fallout some 15 years later. The younger sister of the Queen of the Fantasyland asks for their help tracking her sister down, and things escalate from there. For those of you who haven't seen my other video, or if you have seen it but forgot, I fucking hated this book. Even the few things I did kind of like, the ending, for example, really just served to make the rest of the book feel worse by comparison. The dialogue was the sort of insincere snark that only teenagers think is clever. The characters were obnoxious. The writing was just kind of poor. But the one thing that really cheesed my crackers on this one was the storyteller's corner bits between chapters, where Shannon, the sister queen, reaches out of the page to grab you by the throat and tell you things the author thinks you're too stupid to have figured out on your own. Like, things we've already been told, or would be told diegetically within a few pages. There's no joy of noticing things for yourself because you're never allowed to. Genuinely, I wish we had a staff unrecommends shelf at work so I could put this book on there. It's hands down one of the worst books I read this year, and I'm still pissed off about it. 1 star. This book hates me and the feeling is mutual. Meg Schaefer can meet me in a Denny's parking lot. The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. No content warnings apply. Boy, let me tell you, when she says life-changing, she means it. I never actually watched Tidying Up with Marie Kondo back when that was like a huge thing on Netflix, mostly because I don't have Netflix and I am too lazy to pirate. I, like most people, Have a fraught relationship with cleaning. I want to have a neat and tidy space, but I hate the process of keeping things clean. I found it really helpful to have thoughts on cleaning and keeping my house tidy other than just because you should. This is a book that I'm honestly probably going to have to read a few more times to really get. I have access to multiple libraries that have copies, so it's fine. But honestly, even just applying a few ideas from this book has helped change my room for the better. I originally read it in February, and as I'm writing this in December and recording this in January, I've been consistently making my bed every day, and the way I store my clothes has changed, making them far neater and easier to access. I think I'll read it again in the new year and really try to get myself together here. Marie Kondo's non-judgmental yet firm instructions, along with explanations for why her methodology works, were super helpful to me. This is also the book that really started me reading more nonfiction this year, which is a fun little side effect. Of course I gave it 5 stars. I mean, come on. It works. A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. Content warnings for explicit sexual content, spousal abuse, discussion of coerced sex, familial negligence, violent and somewhat graphic deaths, and misogyny. This is another one I read for my activity kit, and so again is one that I've already discussed in detail in another video. However, it is also unfortunately one that I really fucking hated. Outside of the last Binding trilogy, it was my first proper romantasy, and it didn't give me a very good impression of the genre. It pisses me off so bad because romantasies should be totally perfect for me. But here we are. A Fate Inked in Blood is the first book in the Saga of the Unfated duology, and it has no redeeming qualities. Freya, the main character, is an insufferable moron that the book tries to portray as cool and badass, despite the fact that she has literally no agency the whole book. She literally abandons her dream of being a cool and badass warrior lady so she can run off and have a trad wife fantasy with her shitty boyfriend. Said shitty boyfriend, Bjorn, is every boring alpha male romantic lead that's ever existed. It feels like the book can't commit to its fantasy Viking setting because they had to make Bjorn attractive to a modern audience, so instead of the typical stylings that everyone else has, he's got an undercut and 5 o'clock shadow. The writing is bad, the magic is dull, the characters are stupid. If I hadn't been reading it for a specific video, I would have refused to finish it. Of all the books I'm giving 1 star today, this is one of the ones I think deserves it most. A Fate Inked in Blood was absolutely terrible in every way that it's possible for a book to be terrible. I will never be touching another Danielle L. Jensen book again, and I highly recommend that you don't either. Straight by Chuck Tingle. Content warnings for homophobia, transphobia, violence, and gore. My first audiobook of the year. I figured I'd start off with a nice short one. Straight is technically an audio novella. I think I mostly listened to it while playing Stardew Valley because I am the kind of person who does that. Straight is a horror novella about a group of queer friends trying to survive in a world where one night a year, every cis-het person in the world turns into a mindless killing machine hell-bent on destroying queer people. It doesn't matter how much of an ally they actually are in their day-to-day, they basically become zombies for a night. The book explores themes of homophobia and transphobia, obviously, but also allyship and even vaccines a little. Unfortunately, Straight isn't as good as Camp Damascus, in my opinion. Like, don't get me wrong. Fine and serviceable enough. It has the same kind of mundane horror mixed with supernatural or cosmic horror that I liked in Camp Damascus, and I liked the characters just fine, and the plot was engaging, and the horror was visceral and gory and freaky as hell. But you can tell this one was written earlier because it's just not as good. There are a lot of phrases that get repeated constantly. If I heard the narrator say they shake their head from side to side one more time, I was going to snap my phone right in half. Same with using questioned or offered as dialogue tags to the point of obnoxiousness. Are these huge things? No, but they did significantly impact my enjoyment of the book. Overall, though, I'd still give it 3.5 stars. Like I said, Camp Damascus was better, in my opinion, but it's not like it completely soured me on Chuck Tingle as a whole. Not a bad way to spend a few hours, especially if you can get it free through your library like I did. A Drunken Dream and Other Stories by Moto Hagio. Content warnings for child death and familial abuse. This is a collection of manga short stories that I found at work by accident. Someone returned it and I flipped through it because I thought the art was pretty. I love this style of older shoujo manga. It's beautiful and almost delicate looking. I don't know anything about this mangaka, but I'd love to read some more of her work. I really liked the more fantastical elements of her stories. Iguana Girl was my favorite because, of course it was, but the one about the family whose youngest son had died made me cry on my lunch break. I wish I had more to say about this because I did give it 4 stars, and I do think it deserves them. But honestly, I read this book very quickly over the course of a single shift at work. It was good, and I liked it. If you like shoujo manga, you should check it out. Sorry I don't have anything more to say than it was good. Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. No content warnings apply. I've seen TJ Klune around a lot in the last few years. First stumbled across his work when In the Lives of Puppets first came out because my brother and I were perusing a sci-fi fantasy table at the bookstore and it was there. I thought it looked interesting, but I wound up reading this book first because, I'll be honest, I'm biased towards stories about psychopomps. I just think they're neat. Under the Whispering Door is the story of Wallace, a shitty, ruthless lawyer who dies far before his time. With the help of a wacky cast of characters, including a freshly minted reaper, an unfairly attractive tea shop owner, a kooky old man ghost, and a ghost dog, he needs to come to terms with his death and the life that preceded it so he can move on to what's next. However, the bonds he's starting to form, particularly with Hugo, the aforementioned tea shop owner, are starting to make that even more difficult. I really liked this book. Again, I'm predisposed to anything to do with psychopomps, but overall the book was just sweet. This was another entry in my quest to enjoy cozy fantasy, and I'll admit I liked it more than my other forays into the genre. The characters were solid, even the ones I didn't like. I'm telling you, almost every story can benefit from a weird old man character. More Gersons in everything. There were a few eye-rolling elements, like the whole no Wi-Fi, talk to each other thing in the tea shop, but not generally enough to detract that much. This one also got 4 stars. I wrote in my journal that I was excited to read more TJ Klune later at some point, and then didn't read any more of his books for the rest of the year. Sorry, Mr. Klune, I got distracted by, well, you'll see. The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. No content warnings apply. This is another one that I already talked quite a bit about in my activity kit video, so I won't go into too much detail here. The Starless Sea is a story about stories, how telling and retelling and listening to and creating them is what makes us people. Zachary Ezra Rollins finds a book at his college library wherein he features as a character, sort of, and things spiral out from there. He gets drawn into a whole conspiracy and a magical world, and it's just really fascinating and compelling. In all honesty, at first I thought it was going to be a pretentious slog. I've said it before, but a lot of fiction about stories tends to be really up its own ass about it. Most writers are writers, and most readers are readers, after all. The Starless Sea didn't feel like it was preaching to me about how good it was that I was reading a book, though. It was just a really interesting journey. The book has an almost dreamlike quality to it, which felt appropriate given what it was about. It had the exact sort of ending that I wanted it to, where things have turned out all right and there's more to be found, more adventures to be had. But for now, our time with this story is over, and you can close the book with a satisfied catharsis, a settled feeling that you've just experienced something well and truly excellent. The Starless Sea has, of course, no stars, but I gave it 5. Can't recommend it highly enough. I loved it. It has a permanent spot on the staff rec's shelf at work. The Gunslinger by Stephen King. Content warnings for violence, particularly violence against women, gore, child death, sexual content, and misogyny. The first book in the Dark Tower series, The Gunslinger follows Roland, the last gunslinger, as he pursues the Man in Black. Slowly, the story of who these men are and why they're engaged in this chase unfolds. This was the second audiobook I listened to this year, and honestly, I mostly listened to it while driving on my commute. The version I listened to had a great narrator. I liked him a lot. So I found out way after the fact that having my first proper Stephen King novel be The Gunslinger is like starting to watch the MCU at Captain America Civil War. There are a ton of references to King's other works in it that it's somehow a melting pot of or whatever, and apparently that's sort of the point of the Dark Tower series as a whole, I guess. I'll definitely admit this impacted my reading experience, but I swear to you, I was enjoying it for the most part for probably about 85% of the book, even not knowing any of that. I picked this up because of another writing class that I was taking online at the time. The instructor was talking about the power of beginnings and endings in books and how to use them effectively and so on, and brought up how the first book of The Dark Tower begins with "The man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed," and the last book ends with the same line. I heard that and went, oh, I need to know what happens between those two sentences. Reader, I no longer care. Let me reiterate what I said about Stephen King earlier. Say what you will, the man can turn a phrase. The prose was really effective, and I was intrigued by the mysteries the book brought up. But one thing I just couldn't get over was the treatment of female characters in it. They existed to be sexualized, brutalized, mourned, or some combination thereof. It was incredibly off-putting, and I didn't like that one bit. A lot of things were over-sexualized, and I realized this was written in the 80s, and there was a lot more that was considered acceptable at the time, but for God's sake, Steve, the mom? Sexualizing the mom? Steve, come on, man. That ending was utterly horrendous, too, though. It didn't feel like an ending. Stuff happened, and then the book just stopped. It felt by and large like a collection of episodes rather than a singular cohesive novel. I wasn't into it. At least it wasn't too long. I wound up giving it 2.5 stars, even though I enjoyed most of it, because the stuff I disliked, I really disliked. I might just look up Wikipedia summaries of the rest of the books, because I don't think I could put myself through that again. I'm willing to give Stephen King another go at some point, though I didn't this year. Maybe The Shining. I've heard good things, and I do love a ghost and or haunted house story. Speaking of, A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. Content warnings for familial abuse, mild gore, and gaslighting. Oh, fuck yes, now we're talking. I got this one on Hoopla, and again, mostly listened to it while driving. A House with Good Bones is about Sam, a young scientist who goes to stay with her mom for a while and discovers she's being haunted by Sam's grandmother in a story about familial trauma and generational abuse. I fucking loved this book. The characters were delightful. Sam had fantastic presence and narration, both in terms of the words written and in terms of the actual narrator reading the book, and it was nice to have a fat protagonist for once. It hit the same way that Camp Damascus did for me last year, with that mundane horror, family generational abuse, mixed with fantastical horror, ghosts and witches and monsters. I think you'd call this gothic horror, but I'm not sure, given that my entire understanding of the genre boils down to gothic horror is when there's a house. Either way, it helped me discover that I do actually really like horror, and Camp Damascus wasn't just a one-off fluke. It was genuinely extremely creepy, and I loved how everything managed to tie together in the end. Not only did I give this one 5 stars, but I also sought out a bunch more T. Kingfisher books later on in the year. This was the first time I'd ever read any of her work, and I found a new auto-read author. Murder in Tinseltown by Max Nightingale. Content warnings for period-typical racism and sexism, violent crime, police violence. This showed up on the new shelf at work, and okay, I can't keep doing that. This showed up on the new shelf at work, and I had to get it. Murder in Tinseltown is a choose-your-own-adventure murder mystery taking place in 1920s Hollywood. A famous starlet is found dead in a locked hotel room, and you, detective for the LAPD, have to find out what happened before the news breaks to the general public. This book was a delightful way to spend an afternoon. I read through it a few different times, choosing different paths and getting different clues. I definitely died several times along the way and had to backtrack. There was only one true ending, as far as I could tell, which on the one hand was a little disappointing for a choose-your-own-adventure book, but on the other hand, for a murder mystery, it does make some amount of sense. I'd give Murder in Tinseltown 4 stars. Like I said, a quick, snappy read that I had a lot of fun with. I'd love to see more in this sort of vein. Choose-your-own-adventure is always a fun time. The River Has Roots by Amal El-Motar. No content warnings apply. I picked this one up because it was written by one of the authors of This Is How You Lose the Time War. Specifically the Canadian one. I loved that book so much that there was no way I was going to miss a chance to read some more. The River Has Roots is about sisters, one of whom falls in love with the Fae. It's about love and family and homophobia and being an outsider and love always finding a way. I wrote in my book journal that The River Has Roots has a lot of things that I liked conceptually about the Lost story, but actually written and executed well. And honestly, I stand by that. It's something of a story about stories, but like The Starless Sea, it doesn't feel overly pretentious about it. Occasionally it could get a little obnoxious about its own subversions, but not distractingly so, certainly never to the same level as the Lost story. I never felt annoyed that I was being preached to about how important stories are to people. It was just a great read that I blasted through in like a day. The River Has Roots gets 5 stars from me. There's also a bonus short story included, which I didn't read because presumably it's going to be in the short story collection that Amal El-Motar has coming out in 2026. I already have it on my whole list at work. You bet your ass I'm reading more of this. This author hasn't missed for me yet. Voyage of the Damned by Frances White. Content warnings for violence. Another Hoopla audiobook that was my commute listen for a couple of weeks. Ganymedes D. Pissarro is the heir to the most ignored province of Concordia. He, along with the other 11 heirs, have to go on a big pilgrimage to celebrate 1,000 years of peace. On the first night, the princess of the land is murdered, and everyone is a suspect. The thing about this book is that it's fine. All its most interesting aspects were done better in The Locked Tomb, with the world divided up into semi-isolated sections, each with their own specialty, and the main character being from the one that everyone else likes to pretend doesn't exist. The world felt pretty basic and not very interesting. There were a lot of times where it felt like the author was really imagining a film adaptation because there was just way too much description of everything. A lot of dumb piss and shit jokes that made me stare into the middle distance, which is not a good thing while you're driving. The child writing was utterly atrocious and made me think the author hasn't interacted with a child since she was one. All that said, there were some genuinely good and well-executed twists, especially around the final reveals, and I did enjoy the mystery part of the story. Unfortunately, it does fall into the whole there just needs to be the right person in charge to make the world good again thing towards the end, but in all honesty, that could be my bias talking or just me being uncharitable. Like I said, it's fine. 3.5 stars. I guess it's TikTok famous or something, but I don't use TikTok, so I hadn't heard of it before. It stands up decently well on its own merits, but it's not exactly changing the shape of literature or whatever. The Sky on Fire by Jen Lyons. Content warnings for non-explicit sexual content, implied attempted sexual assault, violence, blood and gore, themes of consent and abuse throughout. The fourth of my activity kit books, so again, lighter on the details. Anarad scrapes out an existence after being literally cast down from her home for attempted robbery before being picked up by a ragtag band of misfits looking to pull off the heist of a millennium and steal from the Empress of all dragons herself. I'm gonna be honest. I was too nice to this book. I wanted to like it. It should have been exactly my cup of tea. A queer-led fantasy heist with revenge and dragons and big drama and so on. But mostly it just had me sending quotes and Cliff's Notes to my brother with variations on, can you believe this shit? Like, girl, why are you saying shit like the lamps were lucent? Like, I have a decently big vocabulary. Hell, in this video alone, I've already said stuff like peruse and catharsis and thereof. And I swear to God, this is in fact how I talk in real life. But I would never say the lamps were lucent instead of the lamps were lit, because that is an insane and stupid thing to say. It was giving big thesaurus.com open in another tab energy. Not to mention, of course, all the other issues I brought up in my other video. The overly horny storytelling and world building. And for what, honestly? Boring one-note characters, a fast-paced story where little of consequence happens for chapters at a time. Half the characters felt like they were cameos from something I'd never even heard of for all the depth they got. The climax was rushed and unsatisfying, just really not very good. I originally gave it 3 stars, but honestly I'm dropping it to 2. It goes on the staff recs at work only if I legitimately can't find anything else I've read and enjoyed even a little. Hark a Vagrant by Kate Beaton. No content warnings apply. Okay, listen. By the time I got this, I had just finished reading The Sky on Fire and I had just gotten the next book from my activity kit, which I knew I wasn't going to enjoy. I knew I had to read something at least halfway decent in between them or it was going to do actual damage to my physical body. I worship the ground Kate Beaton walks on and knew I'd have a good time with this. And a good time is exactly what I had. It was a fun, breezy reread. Definitely a time capsule of late 2000s, early 2010s internet humor, but still so much of it was timelessly funny. It was extra fun finding strips or panels that I've seen around as memes and getting to remember the full context of them. It was exactly the kind of pick-me-up between bad books that I needed. 5 stars. Obviously. If you think I'm giving Kate Beaton anything less than that, then you are a fool. Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. Content warnings according to Storygraph. Graphic violence, death and child death, moderate alcohol, sexual assault and misogyny, and minor rape, parental death, and vomit. This book is the whole reason I read Hark a Vagrant. It's the first book I DNF'd this year, though it wouldn't be the last, and honestly there were a few before this that I'd considered quitting earlier too, like Voyage of the Damned and A Fate Inked in Blood. Swordcatcher is about Kel, an orphan boy who becomes at once bodyguard and body double for the Prince of Castellane, and Lynn, a woman who wants to be a healer and who is from a society and culture that is demonized and persecuted. At some point, presumably, their goals intersect and they cross paths, but I didn't get that far because I fucking quit. This was my first Cassandra Clare book, and I swear to you, I tried to give it a fair shake. I needn't have bothered. Every sentence was totally overwritten. Again, Rich coming from Little Miss Utterly Atrocious over here, but it felt like she was overcompensating for bad writing by using obscure words. Nothing happened very slowly. I gave up about 70 pages in because we hadn't even gotten an inciting incident yet. Literally over 10% of the way in, and everything had been built up. I felt like that one MST3K bit. And! But the opposite. Start! 1 star. Utter garbage from top to bottom. I had a patron sincerely recommend it to me when they were picking up the second book, and if I wasn't so fucking good at my job, I would have laughed in her face. The Affair of the Mysterious Letter by Alexis Hall. Content warnings for mild body horror, mild gore, and drugs. Stumbled on this one by accident while trying to find urban fantasy novels at work. It turned out we had the audiobook for this one on Libby, so I nabbed it and used it as my commute entertainment for a couple of weeks. The Affair of the Mysterious Letter follows John Wyndham and Scheherazade Haas as they try to discover who's been blackmailing an old acquaintance of Ms. Haas. This was a fun, eldritch comedy, mystery, Sherlock Holmes send-up. There were almost no points where I wasn't having a good time. It had a compelling mystery that I was able to follow along with and keep track of, and I actually managed to figure out the twist ending before it was revealed without it feeling trite or predictable. I loved the way it was written from an older Wyndham many years after the fact as a serialized memoir/adventure story in the newspaper, or a magazine, I forget which. The narrator was great as well. Just a lot of fun. I wish there were more of these because I'd love to hear the continuing adventures of Wyndham and Haas. Scheherazade Haas did get a little annoying at times, but never to the point where I considered quitting the book or anything. She just occupies a character archetype that I instinctively bristle against. I gave this one 4 stars, and it unlocked another author for me. I did wind up reading more from Alexis Hall later this year, so look forward to that. Or don't, I'm not your dad. Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. No content warnings apply. This was, at the time, the only T. Kingfisher book we had a physical copy of at work besides A House with Good Bones. Having enjoyed A House with Good Bones so much, I decided to give Thornhedge a go because it was short and I needed something to wash the taste of Cassandra Clare out of my mouth. Thornhedge is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty with the premise, what if the thorny barrier was put up to keep everyone else safe from the princess and not the other way around? Toadling was originally the princess of the castle, but as a baby she was taken by the Fae and replaced with a changeling. The book alternates between Toadling's interactions with a knight who's trying to get into the castle and break the curse, more for Toadling's sake than anything, and flashbacks of how we got to this point. While this book is incredibly different from A House with Good Bones, I also really enjoyed it. It's fascinating and well written and compelling. I kind of wish that Fayette's death had been more of a deliberate choice by Toadling, but not enough for it to ruin the book, and I can also understand why it wouldn't be. I adored Toadling and wanted only the best for her. She seems to get the truest happy ending. She can always go home, but she's also able to explore the world that she's only ever been adjacent to forever. She deserves it. Go off, Queen. This was another 4-star book for me. It helped cement T. Kingfisher as an auto-read author for sure. Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes. Content warning. Quotes Taylor Swift lyrics. Dan Olson's videos on the 50 Shades of Grey series are some of my favorite go-to videos of all time, and he references this book in it, which is how I heard of it. I took a class earlier this year about the craft of romance writing as well, and while it didn't bring this book up, it did remind me that it was something I had wanted to check out at some point. Romancing the Beat is a craft book about romance writing, breaking the genre down into specific story beats that people expect to see in a romance novel or romance arc. It's quite short, and I read it over the span of a couple lunch breaks. I've already used its beat sheet to help plot out a few romance novels of my own that I swear to God someday I'm going to finish writing. I definitely found it helpful not only about writing romance arcs in non-romance genres, which is generally more what I do, but also recognizing these beats in books that I'm reading. Knowing that the mid-book breakup is a genre expectation doesn't make it any less frustrating when it's done poorly, but the way Gwen Hayes describes it makes it sound so juicy and ripe with drama that I can't wait to put my Blorbos in the Torment Nexus about it. Really enjoyed this one. 5 stars. Like I said, it's a quick and snappy read. I could have gotten it on Hoopla, but due to my unfortunate preference for physical media, I wound up buying it instead. A pretty good use of $15, in my opinion. A Power Unbound by Freya Marsk. Content warnings for explicit sexual content, period-typical racism, specifically towards Italians, sexism, classism, and homophobia. Finally got around to reading the final book in the last Binding trilogy. I hadn't realized that while neither of the libraries I worked at had a copy, my actual local one does, so I made it my personality for a few weeks. A Power Unbound follows Jack and Alan, previously seen as minor characters in the other books in the series, as the fight between their little group of misfits and the magical government comes to a head. The last piece of the first contract is located, betrayals are committed, sex is had, the day is won. Overall, a fantastic conclusion to a series I fully enjoyed. I love a good enemies to lovers love-hate relationship, and this delivered in spades. All the focal point relationships through the series were so different from each other, which I definitely appreciated. The conclusion to the main plot worked well, in my opinion. Society must change in order to continue. Rebuilding from a major loss is possible, but it will take a lot of work and restructuring and changing the way we think about certain people. And it might open up new possibilities we hadn't even considered. I wish we'd gotten more Addie. I loved her so much. She had a line that made me sit up and go, wait a second. Are you Aero Ace? I want an entire book just about her, please and thank you. My favorite book in the series is still A Marvelous Light, but A Power Unbound is still going to get 4.5 stars. Loved it. Don't often buy books because I can just get them from work, but I'm high-key considering trying to get physical copies of the whole series because I just adored it and it feels like one I should own. Even Though I Knew the End by C.L. Polk. Content warnings for religious themes, deals with the devil, and cops. An audiobook I picked up through Libby on a whim, just by seeing what was currently available to borrow. I'm pretty sure I listened to this one either while drawing or playing Stardew Valley, not while driving. By this point, I started to realize driving and audiobooks weren't really going together for me. Even Though I Knew the End is a fantasy noir mystery novella about a woman who sold her soul to save her brother and now has 3 days to win it back by tracking down a serial killer in fantasy 1920s Chicago. It's a perfectly serviceable book. The 20s Chicago but with magic setting was more interesting to me than the characters or plot. The love story between the main character and her girlfriend, I don't remember anyone's names in this book, which is probably not a great sign, felt largely toothless. Despite being constantly reminded of the ticking clock, it also didn't feel that pressing. I never felt like I understood how much time was passing for anything. The religious themes were interesting, though. 3 stars. It was fine. I'd put it on the Staff Rex shelf at work if we had a physical copy and I couldn't find anything else. Also, the way the narrator delivered the 2 title drops just floored me for some reason. I don't think I could explain why. Even though I knew the end. She said it that way both times. I don't know why that's so funny to me. The Foxwife by Yang-Si Cho. Content warnings for child death, period-typical misogyny, sex work, and sexual harassment. The last book from my activity kit video. I didn't actually wind up getting any more activity kits this year, just because I had so many other books to focus on that I couldn't justify reading randomly selected ones that I wasn't even enjoying all that much statistically. The Foxwife is a historical fantasy novel set in what's now northern China, told in dual POV between Snow, a fox spirit in the guise of a beautiful woman seeking vengeance for her dead child, and Bao, a human detective slowly piecing together her story. Both Snow and Bao are great characters, and it was satisfying to watch their stories slowly converge. The historical setting was interesting, and even though I know next to nothing about Chinese culture and history, I felt that the important parts were delivered in a natural way. No exposition dumps for us white Canadians. Occasionally, I'd find some of the writing or stylistic choices to be a bit awkward, but ultimately minor, and it didn't impact my reading experience that much overall. I wound up giving The Foxwife 4 stars. I think I mentioned this in my activity kit video, but I can't be bothered to go back and check. I've seen people online saying her previous book, The Night Tiger, is better than this one, and we do have a physical copy of it at work, so maybe I'll finally get around to it in 2026 if I can clear out my backlog a little. Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. Content warnings for gore, body horror, and familial abuse. This was my last audiobook of the year, and it took me so long to get through it. I don't necessarily blame the book itself for that. Around the time I started it, I switched jobs and no longer had a 45-minute one-way commute. My commute has now been shortened to around 20 to 25 minutes, which is nice for my gas bill, but much less conducive to listening to audiobooks for long periods of time. I actually ran out of time with it on Hoopla and had to re-borrow it because I had to return it right in the middle of the big fucking twist. This is also the first book I deliberately read for my local public library's adult summer reading program. They give out a list of challenges to fill, and you get a ballot for each book you read that fills one challenge. The one for this book was, I believe, microgenres. The library counted this book as bizarro fiction, which, sure, whatever. I guess we can just say words. Someone You Can Build a Nest In is about Shisheshin, a shape-shifting monster who eats people, falling for a human woman named Homily whose family is bent on killing Shisheshin to end the supposed family curse. I extremely do not follow book news in any way, and so only recently found out that it won a fucking Nebula award. So, I guess it's a good thing I liked it then? I thought Shisheshin and Homily's romance was kinda bland, especially as it was meant to be the driving force of the novel, but I really liked both of them as characters and thought they brought out the best in each other, which is exactly what you want in this kind of relationship, so it wasn't exactly a huge deterrent. As an autistic woman, I related so hard to Shisheshin, and I loved her narrative voice. The twist that the Baroness was actually Shisheshin's mother was excellently done. The theme of generational trauma and ending the cycle was also extremely well executed. Nice to see some asexual representation in a monster romance, too. I gave this one 4 stars. I'd definitely be interested in checking out more from this author, who I now follow on Blue Sky. I guess he's got a new book out, which I gather from context clues has something to do with Hercules. Maybe next year. Clyde Fans by Seth. Content warnings for non-sexual nudity, dysfunctional family dynamics, and ableism. Another one for the summer reading program. This time I picked the challenge to read something from this year's Canada Reads long list. For the non-Canadians watching, which I assume is most of you, Canada Reads is an event put on by the CBC every year, a sort of battle of the books where Canadian celebrities and famous people champion a Canadian book they think everyone in the country should read. Ducks by Kate Beaton won a couple years ago. Clyde Fans didn't make it onto the shortlist, but it was the only graphic novel nominated, and it had been too long since I read a graphic novel, so I decided to give it a go. Well, I didn't care for it. Clyde Fans is a literary graphic novel about the slow death of a small family business, the titular Clyde Fans, and the strained relationships within that family, particularly between the 2 brothers that the shop was foisted onto when the father ran out on them ages ago. It's, fine, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed the art quite a bit. I love strong line work and a monochromatic color scheme. But it felt very much like it went nowhere and did nothing. I kept waiting for it to pick up and get interesting, but it never did. Several years ago, my hometown held a film festival. There were films from all over the world, including at least one that was actually filmed in my hometown, which was pretty cool. Feature films, short films, documentaries on every topic. My family and I went to several of them, and it was a lot of fun. However, after a while, we started nervously eyeing the European ones. We'd noticed that a lot of them tended to be a lot of people sitting around and talking, and not very much actually happening. It's all well and good to have a story be mostly about internal or interpersonal conflict. Hell, that's the appeal of, like, the entire romance genre. But you do still have to make it interesting. A lot of the movies we were watching were just kind of boring. That's how Clyde fans felt to me. It was an art piece, and therefore didn't have to concern itself with such things as a good story. I didn't like this book very much, but I guess I'd still give it 3 stars. Like I said, I liked the art a lot, and it was probably my favorite part of the book. You can tell it was done with intention, the way the panels are arranged and things are framed and such. It's objectively a competent book. I just didn't like it. Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. Content warnings for racism, sexism, and cops. The author also has a note at the beginning warning readers about a plot point wherein the main character is framed for drug trafficking. The summer reading challenge for this one was neat. Elemental, it was called. Read a book with an element of the periodic table in the title. Arsenic is atomic number 33, so here we are. Arsenic and Adobo is a cozy mystery, which is generally more my mom's thing than mine, but hey, I love a mystery, and cozy books tend to be at least extremely readable. Arsenic and Adobo is the first in the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mysteries series, and it's about Lila, a young woman who recently dropped out of college to move home and help her family with their Filipino restaurant. Unfortunately, a nasty food critic, who's also her shitty ex-boyfriend, happens to drop dead in the middle of her restaurant, and now she has to help clear her family's name. It's pretty good, but I doubt I'll be reading any more in the series. I found myself frequently getting frustrated with Lila. It felt like she could never stay focused on the task at hand. Like, girl, you are being accused of murder right now. I lost track of how many times she'd put off conversations, only for that to come back and bite her later. You'd think at some point she'd learn. And everyone acting like she was the most evil person in the world for daring to, let me check my notes here, move away from her small town got old pretty fast. I also didn't care for the romance subplots. The 2 love interests, Lila's best friend's older brother, who she'd had a crush on in high school, and the nice dentist, whose brother is the detective dogging her through the whole book, were more or less the same person. They're both nice men with good jobs who like Lila. Whoopee. The actual mystery was compelling and twisty enough, though. I'll give it that for sure. I got a few things right, but not everything, and nothing felt like it had been pulled out of nowhere. Good for Mrs. Long, honestly. Arsenic and Adobo was kinda corny overall, but not bad, I guess. 3 stars. Like I said, I won't be checking out the rest of the series, but my mom might be into them. Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. Content warnings for drugs. My friend Crystal had actually recommended this book to me a while back, so when I saw it on the library's curated list for their As Seen on TV challenge, where you have to read something that was read by a TV or movie character, I took it as an excuse to finally get into it. Entangled Life is a fascinating deep dive into fungi and how it shapes our world and connects all life on Earth. It's a topic I never really considered, like most people, I have to assume. Loved it, though. Definitely made me feel like the Ulysses ogre a few times, but overall I had a good time. Merlin Sheldrake has a way with language that just draws you in. I mostly read it on my lunch breaks at work, which is how I do most of my reading nowadays, and I kept getting annoyed at having to go back to work in the middle of a chapter. It was all very philosophical and heady, but I do feel like I learned a lot about fungi. I have so many world-building ideas that I want to play around with now. The illustrations being done in ink made from mushrooms was a cute touch, too. Absolutely deserves a 5-star rating. Very, very good. Definitely best to read in small chunks, just maybe larger ones than my lunch break afforded me. Mortal Follies by Alexis Hall. Content warnings according to Storygraph. Graphic animal death, murder, and death, moderate sexual content, transphobia and blood, and minor slavery, racism, and parental death. I don't actually remember what summer reading challenge I was going for with this one because I quit only a couple chapters in. I'm mad about it. This is another one I wanted to like, especially after how much I enjoyed The Affair of the Mysterious Letter. Mortal Follies is about a young woman who appears to be the target of a curse and who winds up teaming up with a female duke, not a duchess, to get herself out of it. I was super interested in the premise and the possibility of historical romantasy lesbian romance, but I just could not stand the narrator. This detached fae creature snarking at everything all the time just really put me off, and I quit super early. I just couldn't stomach the idea of 11 more hours of this. I guess most of the rest of it was fine outside the narration, because I did give it 3 stars, but the narration is just so omnipresent that I couldn't escape it at all, and it completely destroyed the vibe for me. Who Goes There by John W. Campbell Jr. Content warnings for body horror. Okay, so maybe this is cheating a little to call this a full book. This isn't a novel or even a novella. It's a short story. But one of the challenges was to read books that take place on different continents, and I wanted to do this one for Antarctica, and I figured it'd be a quick read. So, yes, this is the short story that John Carpenter's The Thing is based on. For the record, I still haven't actually seen that movie. I mostly only know about the short story because of Linkara, of all people. Scientists in Antarctica uncover a freaky creature that slowly takes over and kills people in camp. I mean, it's like the secret monster story. Really freaky and interesting. There were some odd style, dialogue, and overall writing choices that honestly I think can mostly be chalked up to the era in which it was written. Things like character descriptions and horror elements were extremely evocative. Macready is described several times as a bronze statue, which, without telling you much else about his features, already paints an image in your mind, and I liked that a lot. A good twist at the end. I had also forgotten about Blair. Definitely has the old horror issue of, did you see that shit? That was crazy. Anyway, I'm John W. Campbell as an ending, but very good. I really want to watch the movie now. The book at least gets 4.5 stars. Truly excellent. It did make for an extremely funny, unintentional triple feature with Someone You Can Build a Nest In and Entangled Life, though. Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. Content warnings for non-explicit sexual content, discussion of drug and alcohol abuse, and familial abuse. Yet another For the Continent challenge, this time for Europe. I had to get this one through interlibrary loan because for some reason, none of my libraries had a physical copy. One of the ones I work at has the sequel, but that's it. Yet another Alexis Hall, very different from the other two. Boyfriend Material is a contemporary romance about a fake relationship. Luke, down-and-out son of a formerly disgraced rock star, is trying to clean up his image, or at least pretend to, for work reasons. He gets set up with Oliver, a somewhat stuffy junior lawyer, who also needs a fake relationship for family reasons. They navigate the rocky waters of their pretend romance as, gasp, real feelings start to get involved. I'm so glad I gave Alexis Hall another chance after Mortal Follies. This is the book that made me realize I like romance novels. I love a fake dating plot, and this delivered. I liked how messy Luke is as a person, and how he genuinely makes an effort to change, and that it also positively affects his relationships outside of the one with Oliver. I liked how realistically awkward and awful Oliver's parents were. The minute you actually meet them, you instantly understand why Oliver is like that. I wish there had been more time dedicated to Oliver and his issues, since I adored him, but I suppose that was kind of the point. He's trying desperately to keep up an image he doesn't even want, and it fools Luke, our POV character, for most of the book. 4 stars. Loved it. I'm definitely going to read the sequel next year, and I think there's a 3rd book coming out soon. I want to see the real relationship take flight. The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane. Content warnings according to Storygraph. Graphic mental illness, panic attacks and disorders, and homophobia, moderate sexual content, vomit and biphobia, and mild alcoholism and bullying. I think the summer reading challenge I was filling with this one was something to do with TV or podcasting or radio, something along those lines. The Charm Offensive is about a dating show, where one lead is the man all the female contestants are competing for, and the other lead is his handler. I figured, hey, another cute queer romance novel. I liked the dating show premise. I've read fanfics with a similar premise, don't judge me, leave me alone. And I'd been interested in how it was going to juxtapose one of the most heteronormative bullshit pieces of society with a gay love story. Unfortunately, I just couldn't get into it and gave up after a couple days. There wasn't necessarily anything wrong with it. I just got bored. The leads were kind of starting to annoy me, too, and the early pacing felt odd. I had a hard time telling how much time was passing. I don't know, I wouldn't be opposed to checking this one out again sometime, but it just didn't do much for me. 3 stars, I guess. Like I said, it's not terrible. I just got bored. My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. Content warnings for rape and sexual assault, body horror, religious themes, demons, periodical racism, sexism, and homophobia. The last book I managed to squeak in just under the wire for the summer reading program. Literally, I finished it the day before it ended. I just went with the continent theme again, this time having it be North America since this takes place in the US. My Best Friend's Exorcism is a send-up of 80s horror movies and the Satanic Panic. Abby's best friend, Gretchen, is slowly being taken over by a demon, and no one believes her. She winds up going through absolute hell to save her. This is exactly that vein of supernatural horror meets everyday horror that I love. As a Canadian child of the 90s, there were definitely some references to things like the political climate of 80s America that went right over my head, but a lot of it rang too close to home anyway. The Satanic Panic, which is apparently back in full swing. The casual homophobia and racism. The struggle to fit in at all costs. The haves and have-nots. The whole power of friendship compels you ending could have been way more cheesy than it was. And it was already kind of cheesy. But given that the whole book is about Abby and Gretchen's relationship, I thought it was fitting. I was really glad it didn't wind up getting cheapened somehow by some kind of Andras is back actually and he Jeff the kills you jump scare twist ending. The last few pages made me cry, actually. In all honesty, I'd actually wanted to read another Grady Hendrix book, The Final Girl Support Group, but couldn't get my hands on a copy. Still, for a runner-up, this wasn't bad and I'd happily give it 4 stars. A Natural History of the Romance Novel by Pamela Regis. No content warnings apply. I mentioned before that I took an online class about romance writing earlier this year. Well, this was the book the instructor recommended. She'd read it when she was in college herself, and a large part of the course framework used the same framework as this book. I had to get it through interlibrary loan since, as far as I can tell, there's only one public library in Ontario that has a physical copy. Toronto, unsurprisingly. Man, I don't know. I was really interested in the history of the romance novel. Like, genuinely. I was fascinated by its evolution out of the classical comedy into what we now recognize as the romance novel form. Looking at genre-defining novels like Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre, as well as modern for 2003 romance novelists, was neat. Using her own framework of romance genre elements, Regis shows how a romance novel takes these base elements and makes them their own. Analysis of what exactly makes a romance novel, and the defense against people who deride the genre without bothering to understand it or its appeal was good. But the way the author slammed feminist critique of the novel really set off alarm bells. I found myself reading it with an overwhelming sense of wariness and dread. Yes, there are a ton of criticisms of the romance genre that basically boil down to women like it, so it's bad. But there's also a lot to be said about how the genre generally upholds a heteronormative, amatonormative, patriarchal standard, especially mainstream category romance. Regis spent a lot more time arguing against the so-called feminist critique of the romance novel than she did any other criticisms. I feel like I should be offended. Like, are you only talking about those because they're the only ones actually worth discussing? Because you can really just dismiss anything along the lines of women like it, so it's bad, out of hand. That's not really how it came across, though. It felt very much like, actually, it's totally progressive and feminist already, because it's a power fantasy for women to be able to save and heal men. Just, yeah, I don't know that I can succinctly put into words how much that bothers me. This book was dense and academic, but not unreadable, and again, I did like the history, so I gave it 2.5 stars. It just really gave me the ick, and I can't in good conscience recommend it to people. If you're interested in the craft of romance writing, get your hands on a copy of Romancing the Beat instead. Writing Mr. Right by Alina Kawaja. No content warnings apply. Yet another case of I saw it on the new shelf at work and decided to give it a go. Zia is a struggling law assistant by day and aspiring romance novelist by night. When she hits a huge roadblock and decides to give up writing forever, Her muse appears in the form of a hot guy named Ashik and gently bullies her into improving her life. I figured, what the hell? It looked fun, and the author is Canadian. Let's try it. Well, I was right. It was fun. It wasn't much more than that, but it was fun. The premise was decently executed, but still felt very basic. Zia was a good protagonist, and I did mostly enjoy her journey, and I liked being in her head, which is so important for a POV character. But she was also kind of dull. Girl had the most basic taste imaginable. When she was starting to get to know her coworkers and started gushing about Emily Henry, I rolled my eyes so hard I hurt myself. And when she started doing a Taylor Swift song at karaoke, I actually said, "Are you fucking kidding me?" out loud. I don't know, there's nothing wrong with liking that stuff, even if I personally don't. It's more that it made her seem tailor-written for the average new adult romance reader to project onto. Like, give her one weird or obscure thing to be super into, you know? As for Ashik, he's fine, again, but his development felt oddly infantilizing at times, and teetered on the edge of Born Sexy Yesterday. I don't know, I guess I expected more from him than just a manic pixie dream boy. What I remember of the writing was kind of basic and boring too. Overall, like I said, it's not bad. It's just basic, and I want more to chew on with this kind of book. I wound up giving it 3 stars. I do hope the author keeps writing and improves. I'll be keeping an eye out for her on the new shelf again. The Dead Husband Cookbook by Danielle Valentine. Content warnings for murder, constant discussion of cannibalism, and gaslighting. Would you believe this is another one that I found on the new shelf? The cover and title immediately grabbed me, as did the Sue Ann Nivens but with murder allegations premise. The whole thing is about an old-school TV chef wanting to write her memoir for the first time, and dragging a book agent named Taya into her family's whole insane drama. There are murders, there's a weird child, there's a fortune and reputation and job loss at stake here. The Dead Husband Cookbook has such a compelling writing style and atmosphere. I couldn't put it down. There were several twists I figured out on my own, but others I didn't, and none of them felt like they should have been so obvious a child could figure them out. The mystery was intriguing and just an incredibly fun read. Taya was a good protagonist in that whenever she did something boneheaded or against her best interests, I was hard-pressed to say I wouldn't do the same in her situation. I am also a nosy bitch who wants to find out. So, why am I only giving it 3.5 stars if I loved it so much? Well, that last-minute twist ending, honestly. I don't know. I feel like it's a cop-out to spend the whole book having the protagonist go, well, there were cannibalism claims and jokes in the media forever, but those were mostly just edgy tryhards making fun of a successful woman. And then have the twist ending be that, yeah, she did actually eat her husband. Like, okay. I feel like having cannibalism be the twist ending of a book called The Dead Husband Cookbook is just so boring. I don't know, maybe I'm the problem here, but it just didn't work for me. Alright, so there's a big chunk of time here where I wasn't filling out my journal properly. I'm missing a few pieces of data for the next few books, notably their page count and the exact dates that I started and finished reading them. Not that it matters all that much, but I figured I'd mention it so it will be reflected in the info cards. Okay, here we go. Small Town Big Magic by Hazel Beck. Content warnings for allegorical sexual assault, non-explicit sexual content, and fictional bigotry. I swear to God, I'm not going to go off on another tear about this book. I'm just going to say I hated it, and it had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Small Town Big Magic is a pathetic wet fart of a romantasy novel, with terrible flat characters and a meandering plot featuring unfunny comedy, consistently dropped and forgotten plot points, anti-feminist feminism, and a romance that's as bland and tasteless as eating Kleenex. This was, hands down, the absolute worst book I read this year. It was so bad I wrote 28,000 words trying to discourage others from putting themselves through it. I made a whole video about it. 1 star. Half a star. No stars. This book sucks, and I'm glad I never have to interact with it again. Truly horrendous. Have a terrible day. Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. Content warnings for homophobia and gore. The utter whiplash of going from Small Town Big Magic to Bury Your Gaze was astounding. Bury Your Gaze is a horror novel about a gay TV writer who refuses to comply with the algorithm his execs want from him and starts getting stalked and attacked by horror creatures that he created. It's an absolute roller coaster of a book that went in so many interesting directions. It's a great deconstruction of generative AI in creative industries, the politics of queer identities in media, and queer horror. Chuck Tingle is so good at that specific blend of supernatural and realistic horrors that I love, and this is no exception. Although I don't know if you can call hyper-realistic AI nanites supernatural, but that's really just splitting hairs at this point. Also, loved the Ace character and our consistent popular media erasure being the linchpin in the climax. Mwah! Absolutely a 4.5-star book. Adored it. I think it's my favorite Chuck Tingle book so far. Hemlock and Silver by T. Kingfisher. Content warnings for child death, fade to black sex, and sexism. One of the advantages of working where I do is that I see the new books as they're being processed, because I'm the one doing the processing half the time, and I can put stuff on hold before it even hits the shelves. That's what I did with Hemlock and Silver because, like I said, T. Kingfisher has become an auto-read for me. Hemlock and Silver is a sort of Snow White reimagining. Our protagonist, Anya, is a fantasy toxicologist who the king asks to find out if something is poisoning his daughter. Anya tries all her usual methods, but when she accidentally discovers a magical world on the other side of the mirrors all over the castle, she winds up being pulled into a whole conspiracy. This book has everything. A talking cat, a protagonist in her mid-30s, an awkward but kind of cute romance, a fascinating mystery. I adored Anya, and despite the fact that she's clearly got some not like other girls type stuff going on, the narrative, and Anya herself, never feels like it's propping her up by putting other women down. When Anya talks about makeup and how it can hurt women, it's never in a because women are vain and stupid way. Hazel Beck? Take fucking notes. Easily a 5-star read for me. This is probably my favorite Kingfisher book so far. We did just get Snake Eater in at work though, so we'll see how long it holds on to that spot. The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. Content warnings for gore, violence, especially towards women, rape, and sexual assault. I finally got to read it! Only took me several months. I actually tried much earlier in the year to listen to the audiobook version, but unfortunately, one of the things I liked most about it just didn't work for me at all in audio format. There's this whole cool bit where between the chapters there'll be posts, articles, transcripts, notes, VHS cases, whatever, that add little bits and pieces to the story and the world. I loved them, but the very first one was a series of Reddit posts. Listening to a Reddit thread be painstakingly read out loud was awful. I couldn't get through it. Then it turned out the new library I just started at this summer had a physical copy, so I finally picked it up and was able to get around to it. The Final Girl Support Group is about a group of women who all survived scenarios straight out of 80s slasher movies. They attend group therapy together and are slowly starting to fall apart. One of them turns up dead, and someone is clearly gunning for the rest of them. Our protagonist, Lynette, scrambles to figure out what's going on because she's built her whole life around keeping herself and the rest of her group safe from this exact situation. This book absolutely ruled. While there were definitely a lot of references that went over my head due to not having seen any 80s slasher movies, that didn't matter at all. It was high octane and extremely personal at once. Even though Lynette is, let's face it, not really a good person, and her paranoia definitely hinders her, you can't help but root for her. I want everything to be okay eventually too. And maybe someday it will be. Horror with a hopeful ending is rapidly becoming a personal favorite. This book was definitely better than my best friend's Exorcism. Another 5-star book for me. I have another Grady Hendrix lined up for the new year already. Enshittification by Cory Doctorow. No content warnings apply. Fixing the internet isn't enough. I need C-suite people in the tech industry to blow themselves up. So, obviously, I loved this book. I've never read any of Cory Doctorow's work before, but I saw a bit of buzz about this online, and my friend Crystal reblogged some posts about how he refused to sell on Amazon because of their DRM bullshit, so I figured it was absolutely worth my time. And it was. There was quite a bit in this book that I knew about, at least in passing. I'm not a huge online activist or anything like that, but I am a Tumblr user who likes their privacy, so I'm kept abreast of whatever bullshit Microsoft or Google or whoever is doing these days, whether I like it or not. And of course, there was quite a bit from before my time. Again, I grew up in the 90s, and my parents weren't able to get reliable internet to their house until 2021. We had dial-up or nothing. But there's so much more that I wasn't aware of. It's all presented in a well-written, enjoyable format. I think enshittification should be required reading for anyone who interacts with technology in general and the internet in specific. So, everyone. I wish I could throw it at every person I interact with at work. Patrons, colleagues, supervisors, whatever. And force them to understand this stuff. Things are better than they've ever been in some ways, and in others they are so much worse. And as the de facto tech guy at work, I am once again begging my colleagues to understand the world in the way Cory Doctorow explains it. 5 stars for sure. Truly, the situation is dire. And yet we persist. Despite Facebook's best efforts. Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Content warnings for period-typical racism and misogyny, body horror, sexual assault, and harassment. Picked this one up on a whim at work and blasted through it. I'd heard good things about Silvia Moreno Garcia and figured I'd give her a go. Mexican Gothic is about a young woman in 1950s Mexico who has to help out her cousin, who married a formerly rich Englishman and is now going through some kind of sickness and or mental breakdown. Noemi tries to convince the family to bring her cousin to psychiatric care in Mexico City, but they won't have it, and she tries to piece together what's actually wrong while also trying to fend off the general weirdness of the family. I love being right about things. As soon as the mold on the wallpaper was brought up, I knew it was going to factor in somehow, and I was right. Thanks, Entangled Life. I didn't know to what extent it was involved, of course, and as always with twists or plot points that you figure out ahead of time, the difference between feeling smart and feeling cheated is all in the execution. That said, finding out the actual answers to everything and learning all the other twists was so good. Mexican Gothic is beautifully written. It's about absolutely awful subject matter. Eugenics plays a huge role, but utterly gorgeous prose. Really excellent book. 5 stars, no question about it. I'll definitely pick up more from this author next year. Brigands and Book Knives by Travis Baldree. Content warnings for fantasy violence. I had no idea he had a new one coming out, so this was exciting. I'd felt extremely middling about his first 2, but I'd also felt that the second was a marked improvement over the first, so I was excited to see if this one continued the trend. Brigands and Bread Knives is about Fern, the bookseller from Bookshops and Bone Dust, having moved to Thune and opened a bookshop beside Viv's coffee shop. Or at least it starts out that way, before Fern has another midlife crisis, drowns her sorrows, and wakes up the next morning in the cart of a legendary warrior halfway to the next town. She winds up accompanying her on her way to turn in her bounty, a chaotic goblin girl who loves silverware and causing problems on purpose, and trying to figure out who she is on the way. While Bookshops and Bone Dust remains my favorite of the series, I'm a sucker for a necromancer plot, I do think this one was an improvement for sure. Love a good road trip of self-discovery. Baldree describes in the acknowledgements how this is a book about the agony of expectations and the difficulty of saying no, and yeah, God. I love Fern. She was great in the last book, so I was really glad to have a whole book about her in this one. Some of the same writing problems persist, like the epithet issue and the one-sentence paragraphs, but they were less obtrusive this time around for whatever reason. I guess the absolutely ruinous experience that was Small Town Big Magic inoculated me against being too nitpicky about books I otherwise largely enjoyed. The wholesome or non-violent solution to the major crux of the story didn't make me want to throw anything like it did with the mob boss plotline in Legends and Lattes either, which was good. I'd give this one 3.5 stars, continuing to see improvement. I'm glad the series keeps going, and I'm hopeful for more. Swordcrossed by Freya Marsk. Content warnings for explicit sexual content. Been fighting for my life trying to get this one from work for whatever reason. It just always seemed to be out whenever I went looking for it, or if it did happen to be in, I didn't have time to read it for whatever reason. Finally snagged it and forced myself to just read the damn thing. Swordcrossed is about Matty, heir to a merchant house that's doing pretty terribly financially. He's set to marry for money and hires/blackmails a young man named Luca into standing sword guard for him in case the guy who's in love with his fiancée tries to challenge the union. He also gets Luca to teach him to use a sword himself. And of course they fall in love along the way. This is a romantasy after all. I enjoyed it. I like Mark's writing quite a bit, and Maddie and Luca were great. I'm a sucker for a character who takes on way too much responsibility and flounders learning to let things go, or let people in to help them. Maddie was a great example of that. I will say, the second Maya and Sophia were on page together, I went, why not just let them get married instead? They're clearly into each other, and that'd solve at least half of their problems. And lo and behold, guess what ends up happening at the end? The day is saved with the power of lesbians! I'd give Swordcrossed 4 stars. I think A Marvelous Light is still my favorite Marsk book. I just can't give up my OG boys, Robin and Edwin. But this one is also quite good, and it's nice to have a standalone that I don't need to read a whole series for. So that's what I read in 2025. Goddamn, this was so much. Too much, some might say. Fucking 43 books? More than 3 times my goal? Besties, I am not doing that again. I barely made any art this year, and I have video games I want to play, and projects I want to work on, and I'd like to move at some point this year. I can't keep this up. It's just not sustainable. I know there are people who read over 100 books in a year, and I can't imagine doing that. Not without spending every waking moment that I'm not working or asleep with a book in my hand, or worse, trying to listen to audiobooks at 1.5 speed, and I can't do that. I do have other hobbies, you know? To that end, instead of having a set number of books that I want to read this year, I've made myself a bingo card with different challenges on it. I don't have anything overly lofty that I'm trying to achieve here. Filling in the whole thing would be great, but I'll settle for 3 bingos. I'm still going to be doing various challenges at my local public library, after all. I don't want to feel like I'm rushing through these things and burning myself out. I would like to try audiobooks out again, though. Like I said, I'm learning to crochet, and hopefully in 2026 I'll get to the point with it where I can do that and listen to an audiobook at the same time. We'll see. I'm probably going to make a lot of very lumpy dishcloths. Otherwise, maybe I'll start listening to them while I paint. Thank you so much for watching. What were your favorite books that you read in 2025? Any recommendations to help fill out my bingo card for 2026? Let me know. Thanks for indulging me here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Average Precure season. I would love to talk about the life-changing magic of tidying up by Marie Kondo. I would love to discuss that. I would love to be talking about that right now. But these fucking guys are taking their sweet-ass time with the recycling. Leave. I have no soundproofing in my room. You have to leave. He's got an undercut and flive. Sorry for leaning right next to the microphone before doing that. Water. Arsenic and...